Today on Fear and Greed, global leaders, including Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, push for free trade around the globe at the APEC summit, although the shadow of Donald Trump does loom large. Big-name fund managers pick their top stocks for 2025, and Deadpool and Wolverine kickstarts Disney. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news. For people who make their own decisions, it is Monday, the 18th of November 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, the main story this morning, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has used his final speech at a meeting of APEC leaders to push for climate change action and further cutting of emissions. And he's also called for nations to embrace clean energy.
That's right. He said those tenets are central for Asia-Pacific countries to build new sources of inclusive growth and lasting prosperity. Speaking in Lima, Peru, ahead of flying to Rio de Janeiro for the G20 summit, Mr. Albanese said the global move to net zero represents the biggest economic shift since the Industrial Revolution. And I quote him, "Making the move to more solar, wind and green hydrogen is essential for us to deal with the threat that climate change poses to our environment, our farmers, our forests, our oceans and rivers, and our future food security." It came ahead of a final APEC leaders' statement, which failed to elevate Russia's invasion of Ukraine and conflict in the Middle East as an APEC priority. Russia and China had a vote on that, so they knocked that one over. But it did push the free trade agenda, with signatories including Mr. Albanese, US President Joe Biden, and Chinese leader Xi Jinping endorsing a rules-based multilateral trading system. In Lima, there was a photo shoot of Joe Biden and Xi Jinping shaking hands. That was a good look. I'll tell you a bit more about that in a moment. The G20 summit, which starts tonight, is more likely to deal with those sorts of conflicts. All of this, APEC, G20, in the background, there's Donald Trump. And the people he has appointed he hopes to appoint to some of the senior positions aren't necessarily great fans of pushing the barrow when it comes to climate change and improving the environment. However, Joe Biden, Xi Jinping, Anthony Albanese and many others were certainly pushing hard on that free trade, climate change, whole sort of sphere over the weekend.
And even trade deals, free trade deals, anything along those lines, there would be big question marks because of Donald Trump's very clear statements about his views on these kinds of deals and the promised introduction of additional tariffs and things. So there would be a little bit of wariness around kind of progressing too far on any deals involving the US, because who knows if they'll actually make it through, right?
Yeah. That's exactly right. And it's just interesting that Xi Jinping was pushing free trade as hard as he was. Joe Biden was pushing it, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later in the show.
Okay. Back home, Sean, Australia has upgraded security ties with Japan, announcing that the two countries and the US will hold annual trilateral amphibious military training. Whenever I say amphibious military training, again, we've discussed this in the past. Do you not just have an image of frogs with guns strapped to their backs?
I know that's your image. My image is more like crocs, sort of crawling along, shooting, that sort of stuff.
They would, I'm assuming you mean crocs, as in crocodiles, as opposed to crocs the shoes. Yes.
Yeah.
You know what? Crocs would actually make a more formidable weapon than frogs.
Really mean. Yeah,
anyway,
totally.
please go on. Give us some credibility back.
The defence leaders of the three countries met yesterday. Lloyd Austin, who's the US Defence Secretary, said the three countries are building advanced capabilities and discussing opportunities under the technology sharing AUKUS Pillar 2. Remember AUKUS, there's 4 pillars to it, and it's not just about submarines, it's about sharing technology, those sorts of things as well. Well, that's what Lloyd Austin was talking about yesterday. Defence Minister Richard Marles said he expects American leadership to continue under Donald Trump, particularly around issues such as the Russia-Ukraine war in the Indo-Pacific. You sometimes wonder when politicians come and say that at this point, whether they're more hopeful than anything else. Mr. Miles also said that Australia will bid to host a climate change summit, actually COP31. That's in coordination with Pacific Island nations. COP31 will be held in 2026. So we've just had COP29 held every year, and Australia would like to host that one.
All right, now away from politics, we're in peak auction season across the nation, with last week being the second busiest of 2024. The preliminary clearance rate came in at 64.1%, the third lowest week of the year.
Yes, so there were 2,900 auctions. Melbourne was busiest, followed by Sydney. Melbourne had about 1,300 auctions, Sydney about 1,100. Melbourne's preliminary clearance rate came in at 64.9%. That's about what Melbourne has been doing. Sydney came in at 63.4%, actually the second lowest of the year. The heat has well and truly come out of that city's market. Brisbane was 56.3%, Adelaide 70.7%, ACT 66%. They're all about what normally happens. There are many fewer auctions in those markets. We're talking kind of 100 or 200 auctions in those markets rather than the thousands in Sydney and Melbourne. Essentially, more supply in the market, it's pushing down prices and clearance rates. The latest price figures suggest Sydney, Melbourne, Hobart, Canberra and Darwin prices are now flat at best. Some are actually going backwards. Adelaide, Perth and Brisbane are still growing, but the impact of the pace of growth really has slowed. Last week, remember, we had the National Australia Bank come out and push back the timing of its forecast for a rate cut to May. It was saying February. Thinks it'll be May. Seems to be this growing view now that the Reserve Bank might not cut in February, which was consensus. Certainly, the markets have priced in a rate cut by September next year, but that doesn't mean they're saying it will happen in September. It's still the best bet among market economists is February, but increasingly pushing it back to about May.
Okay. Were you practicing saying preliminary over the weekend? Because you nailed it every time just then.
Yeah, I know. I focused really hard on the word. I'm not going to say it again because I got it right, I think, twice. So I'm just leaving it at that.
Yeah, you did. I'm really proud of you. Immediately after the show, Sean, you've got a great chat coming up with Jason Ireland and Sean Wiles from McGrath Nickel Advisory. They are the co-authors of the 12th Annual Working Capital Report. And we talk to them every year. We've done this for 3 or 4 years now. We've talked to them about this.
We sure have. What I love about this report and talking to Jason and Sean is it really gives you a great insight into how businesses are operating. So you kind of get all the macro pictures and all the ABS stuff. This working capital report actually tells you what's happening on the ground. Working capital is critical to any business. We go through the trends in the different sectors, what's happening among some businesses, what's happening in others. It's just a fascinating insight into how the economy is performing. And there's both good news and bad news, I suppose, is how I'd put it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's a great conversation. It's coming up after the show. Before that, though, we've got a lot to get through. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, late last week, a bunch of fund managers gathered in South Australia and pitched some of their best stock picks at Son's Heart and Minds Festival conference. It's a conference, isn't it? I think
it's kind of like Glastonbury for fundies.
Maybe that's why I'm thinking of it as a festival, because it feels like it's got that vibe to it, doesn't it?
And over the weekend, the business media, at least, were running pictures of the different people there and their partners with them. And, you know, it probably is Glastonbury, a bunch of performers giving their best. Hopefully not the drugs. I'm sure they're not quite the Glastonbury drugs. But
are you suggesting that there would be drugs at a finance conference?
I'm suggesting there wouldn't be drugs at a finance conference. Yeah, sure. It is Glastonbury for fundies, just without the drugs.
Sure.
The who's who of investment banking was there. And though I wasn't there, the Fin Review was. And so they came up with a bunch of the top stock picks. Now, we're not an investment podcast. We don't agree or disagree with these. If you are going to invest, make sure that you do your homework first. IFM Investors' Ricky Bannon, she reckons corporate travel management is the way to go. It's down 30% this year, corporate travel management. So it's a bit of a contrarian view, that one. Her argument is that the travel sector is now stabilising. Corporate travel management's a good one. Another one there was Elston Capital's Chris Cortis. He picked Perpetual. What he said was it's suffering a severe case of wealth destruction. Oh. Now it's down about, I think 20%, 22%, I think, in 2024. So again, a contrarian view. J.O. Hambro's Samir Mehta went beyond Australia. Tencent Music, which is the Chinese streaming service, massive group. I'd imagine if the Chinese consumer starts spending again, that's what he's backing. It's up about 24% this year already, but that's one from overseas. One from Europe, so North Cape Capital's Fleur White. She came up with Estee Lauder. Now, is it Lauder or Lauder?
Well, I think it's Lauder based on the ads, because I'm a sucker for advertising, and so I just remember the Estee Lauder, those ads.
Those ads. So Estee Lauder is a real. In fact, I might even do something on Estee Lauder this week, because its share price is down 55% this year. It's been hammered out of China. And basically, there's a lot of Chinese luxury brands who are doing really well in China, and the Chinese consumer no longer thinks, I need to buy an LVMH or an Estee Lauder or something like that. They're actually happy to buy their own sort of domestic products.
Okay.
And that's really hit Estee Lauder. Anyway, that's North Cape Capital's pick. Another interesting one, Antipodes partner Vihari Ross picked Airbus. Airbus, the manufacturer. That's more for you, Michael.
Oh, it feels like you really did just give that to me as a concession, knowing my love of aircraft.
That's right.
The local share market, Sean, did well on Friday, rising 0.75%, but it might be in for a tougher day today after some fairly big falls on Wall Street.
I think you're right, Michael. On Friday, the banks led the way, and by the close, the market finished at 8,285 points, flat for the week. Could be a tough day today, though. US stocks were much lower over the weekend. Now, we reported this on Friday afternoon. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said there was no hurry to cut interest rates in the world's biggest economy. People thought that it was laid down as air that the Federal Reserve would cut rates next month. Doesn't seem to be the case. That helped send the tech-heavy Nasdaq down more than 2%. The broad-based S&P 500 was down 1.3%. That will probably hurt our market when we open today. The post-election rally in the US has now retraced about 60% of the gains that it made when Donald Trump was elected. That's on the back of fears of higher inflation. So shares took off and they've come back 60%, basically because people are worried that interest rates are going to be higher for longer. Just an aside, really. So Moderna and Pfizer are big vaccine makers. Mm-hmm. Their share price fell sharply on Friday night, Australian time, after Donald Trump said that he wants Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to head the US Department of Health. Very, very controversial appointment. He still has to get through Congress. Kennedy, of course, is the person who called vaccines a crime against humanity.
Jeepers. Well, isn't that one of just those fascinating exampple of politics really hitting the corporate world?
Yeah. So
wow.
Pfizer and Moderna were down. I think Moderna was down off 7% or something or other. Pfizer was 4 or 5%. Oil remains relatively low, around $71 a barrel. Gold's flat. Iron ore's back below $100 a ton. Things are going sort of southwards, I suppose. But no such problems for cryptos. Bitcoin's rallying, pushing through $91,000 a unit. Dogecoin in the last 10 days or so has more than doubled in value.
Oh, wow.
This is the Elon Musk pushed crypto. The Aussie dollar's at 64.5 US cents. Plenty going on in markets.
We could just finish the show right there. You have crammed so much into that one wrap, from kind of US markets to the Federal Reserve to US politics and oil and gold and local markets and stuff. You could actually just take a break and I'll do the rest of the show if you like.
So much more exciting stuff to come though, Michael.
Oh, there certainly is. Like this one, health insurers, Sean, have asked the federal government to allow annual premium rises of as much as 6%, saying otherwise some funds will collapse or axe top hospital cover.
Private Healthcare Australia is a body that represents Medibank, Bupa and NIB. It has forecast much greater friction between insurers and hospitals and suppliers. Insurers are lodging submissions with the government ahead of annual increases, which kick in from April next year. Now, the Health Minister, Mark Butler, has the final say in all this. He's already indicated he won't agree to 6%. Last year it was 3%, but he has a fight on his hands.
And one of your favourites, Sean, Wagyu beef, is falling from favour as the cost of flavour. Oh, great point. That was a missed opportunity, wasn't it? Because the cost of living crisis is hitting the beef sector.
So Queensland-based agribusiness Australian Agricultural Company, better known as AACO, is one of the biggest beef producers in the country. It reported a more than 30% drop in profit for the 6 months to the end of September, even though revenue was higher. There's great pressure on global meat prices at the moment. Wagyu prices are down 17% year on year to $17.46 a kilo. AECO has been able to sell more beef, so that's kind of helped it. But it's really being hit by lower demand due to the cost of living pressures plus higher input costs, fuel, packaging, that kind of stuff. Now, why I like this story? Well, it's an interesting story, but we did this last week, and AECO is another one of those really fascinating Australian companies. It's almost, well, I think it is 200 years old this year. So it started in 1824. It began as an exporter of wool to the United Kingdom. Now, huge portfolio of stations, 6.5 million hectares, about 1% of Australia's land mass.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's also majority owned is a guy called Joe Lewis. He's a British billionaire. You may remember him from last year. He ended up pleading guilty to insider trading in the US.
He was the guy who gave the tips to a whole bunch of people within his circle, including people who worked like his driver and things like that.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah, it is a cool story.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Mexican food chain. Guzman y Gomez. So I was on a bit of a drive last week up the Pacific Highway from Sydney up to Queensland, and I was struck by how many GYG outlets there were. Like it is really, really becoming something that you don't have to wait long, and all of a sudden there's another one. So if you miss out on your Mexican hit, you can find another one pretty quickly.
205. Australian outlets now.
Yeah, I mean, they're really pushing heavily into drive-through outlets that can actually be run 24 hours a day just in case you need a burrito at 4 a.m.
That's exactly right. I mean, they've got 205 Australian outlets. About half of those are drive-through. 85% of potential expansion sites are now going to be, or they're looking at, hope to be drive-throughs. Dual-lane drive-throughs apparently capture a full range of customers, the early morning tradies. This is how Guzman puts them. Early morning tradies, families, commuters, late night munchies. It's a 4 a.m. burrito. It floated, been a big float. It was sort of the biggest float this year. Now, that's not saying much because there hasn't been many floats. Floated at $22, now about $37 a share. Done pretty well.
Late night munchies.
Mm-hmm.
That is, that's a great choice of words, that is. In international news now, Sean, we've alluded to this one a number of times. Chinese leader Xi Jinping has told US President Joe Biden that he's ready to work with Donald Trump to improve the relationship between the world's biggest economies. That's got to be good news, right?
You hope so, that he was talking to Joe Biden, not Donald Trump. Speaking at the start of what's expected to be their final meeting before Trump takes office, Xi told Biden that the US and China should strive for peaceful coexistence over the longer term, according to a report on Bloomberg. He said solidarity and cooperation are needed to help humanity overcome difficulties, adding that neither decoupling nor supply chain disruption is a solution. And I quote, he said, China is ready to work with the new US administration to maintain communication, expand cooperation, and manage differences so as to thrive for a steady transition of the China-US relationship for the benefit of the two peoples. End quote. Joe Biden, for his part, he said he was very proud of the progress between the two sides. I think for the global economy, the number one unknown is just how the Trump administration will work with China.
Finally, Sean, I mentioned this story at the top of the show. Disney is showing some signs of bouncing back from a very tough period thanks to growing streaming profits and the performance of Deadpool and Wolverine.
I don't get Deadpool and Wolverine.
Have you seen the other Deadpool movies?
I haven't seen any of them.
Well, you're not going to get it then. Like, just go on. Just give us the business. So save the movie reviews for me, the pop culture guy, and you stick to the business.
So earnings are up 39% during the September quarter. Share price jumped 6% after the release of the results. The two big winners, Deadpool and Wolverine, the other one was Inside Out 2, which is a kids movie, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a good one. It's quite good. Yeah, it's a family movie, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So Disney Plus, ESPN Plus, and Hulu, the streaming services are bringing the money. They're doing pretty well. The upcoming holiday season is particularly important for Disney. Couple for you, Michael, with your young children. Moana 2's out. Mufasa the Lion King's out. That's what Disney's pinning its hopes on. For a while, the big negative at Disney has been the experiences division. That's primarily theme parks and cruises, but they are doubling down on it. US theme parks are starting to pick up not doing so well in Paris and Shanghai, but they're launching 2 new cruise ships next year. So they certainly think that's the future.
Okay, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. We're speaking today with Jason Ireland and Sean Wiles from McGrath-Nicol Advisory, all about working capital, the importance of working capital and the current kind of situation for businesses on the ground. And before that, you'll also hear Fear and Greed The Week Ahead, featuring our resident economist, Stephen Koukoulas. So there's plenty of good listening coming up. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you very much, Michael.
It's Monday, the 18th of November, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.